So today I'm super excited to have Rob Hull here, the founding CEO of Adaptive Insights. And the important part of his journey is that it's not just a blended outcome, but also a great bunch of learnings through that outcome. So I invite my partner, Rich Boyle, to introduce Rob to you guys.
Thanks, Joydeep. So I am not the enterprise SaaS guy. I'm Rich Boyle, Joydeep's partner here at Canaan. The reason I get to introduce Rob is I have known him by far the longest. So I've known Rob for a very long time, since we were classmates in college. I think well over 35 years or something along those lines, we've been friends. I know him very well, and the reason I can make that assertion is long before Rob started Adaptive and post-college, we were roommates for 5 years. We worked together at 3 different startups. And if you've been a roommate with somebody at the same time that you're working on a startup, I think we went through a period of probably 4 to 5 years where we saw each other literally for probably 18 hours a day. And we remain best friends to this day. So that gives you a testament, probably more to Rob's character than to mine. I am difficult sometimes. And the teaser I'm going to leave you with, somebody was just asking me a moment ago, if you've known Rob that long and you've spent that much time together, you must have some great stories to share. So you guys have all seen the Hollywood movies where like post credits and everybody leaves the theater and then they kind of have some cool inside jokes and flashback stories to tell from when the film was made. So I'm going to be doing that a little later tonight if you hang around long enough, but I'm not going to break out those stories now. What I am going to say about Rob, we did not have, unfortunately, the opportunity to be investors in Adaptive, which would have been terrific, but he is the exact type of, we tried, Deepak tried. He is the type of founder that you want to back. As somebody who's made the transition from being an operating exec to an executive, knowing what type of founder to look for is absolutely the key to the whole puzzle, if you ask me. And Rob's qualities around not just intelligence and vision, which I think are absolutely essential, and not just about teamwork and leadership, which I think are also absolutely essential, but really about persistence and grit. And the ability to figure out over time, how do you solve problems, how do you get things done, how do you make a great product, and how do you deliver it to your customers at scale. And I'm excited to get the opportunity to introduce my dear friend Rob, who can tell you the story about how they did that at Adaptive over the years. So thank you all for coming, and I'm looking forward to hearing the story myself.
All right, thanks man. Thank you, Rich. Really appreciate it. Rob, welcome again.
Yeah.
Please have a seat.
So that's the nicest 2 minutes that Rich has ever said about me in 35 years. So we got to do this more often. This is great. And you also said, we'll talk about failures. There were no failures, so this will be really quick.
That'd be perfect.
I'm kidding.
We can get back to the drinks.
Over 16 years, there's plenty of failures, for sure.
I bet, for every one of us. Cool. Well, let's get started and let's rewind. I mean, today, all of us are living in this SaaS world. Everything is like getting funded. Things are really as good as it could be, right? But maybe like if we rewind 16 or 17 years ago, right? What was the initial thought process? I think you and Rich were at RMS, and Hemant, actually, he's here.
Right.
At RMS, and you were a CFO there. What was going on in your? I mean, you had done well. You were an accomplished executive. How do you kind of think about starting a company? Because that's a journey in itself, right?
Yeah. So I'll answer that 2 ways. So partially it was. I think I always really enjoy the building and creating part. And I think, so it was a little bit of lots of desire to build and create. It was a lot of, wow, there's just a tremendous opportunity here that no one else seems to see in quite the same way. And then it's a little part of just crazy enthusiasm and sort of not really wanting to see all the hurdles that are in front of you, and just so you just go. And you sort of put all those things together. For me, it was, CFO at RMS, CFO at LoopNet. I kind of took the financial background and said, wow, I have a problem in my role. And And I don't feel like there's a technology out there that's really addressing it in the right way. And so I have this problem, and therefore I have this need. Technology was moving towards SaaS and the cloud, and it was it was ASP and hosted services and lots of different names along the way. And I said, well, look, I can solve a problem for the CFO. We can do that with a subscription model, which actually sort of gotten used to at RMS, believe it or not, way before that was kind of a cool thing to do. And I saw the ability to sort of take the delivery mechanism of the internet to get this product out to market. And so sort of combination of business model, market opportunity, delivery platform, and an enormous hole in the market where there were guys at the top end, Oracle, well actually back then it was really Hyperion, Business Objects, Cognos, and then there was Excel at the bottom end. And so as a CFO, Excel is great, it's easy to use, it's everywhere, it's cheap, and then it starts to run into problems with collaboration and scale and sort of structure of data. So then you like swing to the other end and you ended up with these things that were too heavy, very expensive, required a bunch of IT resources. And so the opportunity that I saw was, look, how do we solve a problem for the CFO that sort of took advantage of a web-based application, ease of use of interface, and that we could kind of come to market in a whole new way.
You had a great domain expertise. There was definitely a gap in the market, but when you think about like the human element of it, right? Like this uncertainty of like embarking on a new journey. How do you think about? Did you even like hesitate for once that, hey, is this something that I want to do versus like keep doing what I'm doing right now?
I think that's back to the just sort of blindly charging forward. No, my wife would laugh and say, I was sort of crazy from the beginning. I don't know why, but I never thought that I couldn't do it. And so that sort of, I'll say extraordinarily optimistic perspective.
And that is the greatest characteristic of a founder, right? Like,
well, I
you
think
have to
you have to have that.
Yeah.
And you have to have that because what I found was so many people are going to tell you no, and it doesn't make sense, and here's why you're wrong. And so at some point, if you don't have this sort of innate confidence in success, it does become pretty challenging. And there were a number of walls that we hit where you kind of have to dig deep and say, why am I doing this? And do I really believe that this is going to succeed? And I think the thing for me is that I always really believed that we could fundamentally change things. And I kept hitting these roadblocks. I'm like, wow, why do people not see this? This is crazy. There's a huge opportunity here.
So to that point around like when you hit a roadblock, again, thinking through a lot of like what goes on in an entrepreneur's mind, how did you think about like a co-founder, recruiting a co-founder, whether one should think about a co-founder or not, right? Like that whole question.
Well, so I can tell you what I did, and then I can tell you what I might do differently.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Things now. So what I did was I got introduced to a guy that through a mutual acquaintance in venture, we did some diligence on a company together for the venture firm. And so we kind of had met. And they connected us again and said, hey, he's looking and you need someone, why don't you guys connect? The math I did in my head was, okay, I like this guy, he seems to be able to pull a team together, he like understands technically what's going to happen. He was the engineering to my business and customer perspective. And he was very well respected within this venture capital firm. And so I thought, okay, well, that's a big part of this for me was, look, I hadn't started anything, and I knew that made it harder to raise money. And so having someone else on the team that was in fact known and respected, I knew was going to be beneficial. If I had to do it again, I think all of those things were right, but we didn't know each other that well. And What I probably didn't fully appreciate, and I would go back and spend more time on, and I've now seen this with other entrepreneurs, is like that chemistry is incredibly important, right? And the motivations for why are we doing this? What do we want out of it? How long are we planning to be in this thing? And what do we each bring to it? You kind of have to have those conversations up front and be very frank with each other. And we sort of did and did a good job of it. But his duration and his outlook and his motivations, I think, were very different from mine. He had a much shorter time frame in mind. He kind of wanted to do something, but it didn't have to be this huge success for him. He was much later in his career. And so I think he kind of went into it thinking, oh, I'll kind of help put this thing together, bring some people, and then I'm going to kind of eventually I'm going to go on my way. And I was like, no, we're going to go conquer the world. This is like life-changing for everyone. Why wouldn't you stay with us forever? And that was like, it never came to any kind of animosity. It's just that eventually he exited the company. Clearly much earlier than I still haven't exited, so still there. Yeah.
That's an amazing. The reason I say it's amazing is because even after that exit, you kept going, and that's like the strength of character that you have to have, really.
Yeah, and I think the great part of that relationship was the people that he initially brought. So we brought in, he brought a team he had worked with of a couple of engineers. I think 6 or 7 of them which they were the first 6 or 7 employees in the company. All of those people are still with the company today.
Oh, wow.
And they are all leaders in one
so they've grown
form or
with
another within the engineering team and actually have moved into other roles inside of the company. And so a big part of what happened at the very beginning was founding a team that actually did have a long-term view and they really did buy into the vision that I helped to create for them. And that's been fantastic to watch them grow and stay throughout.
Awesome. So let's maybe switch gears and talk about the mode of delivery, right? I mean, we are talking about O2 and like we're talking about SaaS, something Wall Street doesn't understand.
Right.
And let alone Wall Street, even like much of Silicon Valley probably is asking a lot of questions. How did you think about SaaS in those early days?
Yeah, so interesting again that at RMS, we had introduced a subscription-based model. So I had some familiarity with that. I kept seeing pieces of it in companies that I was in, and I did a lot of just studying of Salesforce and watching Salesforce. And so the easy thing for me was, as a CFO, looking at what I could do with Salesforce in terms of really rapid, quick adoption, because it had a great UI from a non-technical point of view, right? The business user really liked it. And then I, as a CFO, I was actually getting great data out of it for the companies that I was working with. And I'd seen a bunch of failed implementations of technology that was too hard to use, it was too technically complicated. And so I said, that's what we need within the finance space. We need to put technology out there that's easy to use. And so there were 2 aspects of that. It felt to me like, wow, so SaaS software was really where things were going to head. It makes perfect sense in the space that I was in, which was planning, budgeting, forecasting, reporting. It's a very collaborative and very distributed activity, very data-centric, so we could kind of put core central data on the back end and a structured database in a multidimensional way, but then spent a lot of time on just ease of use in UI. And so I thought, okay, we'll put all of those things together. The problem that we ran into is that the business model around that wasn't very well understood. So a lot of the investors that I talked to early in 2003, 4, 5, it was still kind of coming together. And so there was just a lot of doubt and a lot of skepticism, I think on a number of fronts, but certainly business model being one and how SaaS would play out. There was a lot of skepticism among customers, right? So in 2003, Salesforce was doing reasonably well. NetSuite was just getting going. There were a few things happening, but CFOs are predominantly very conservative, not big risk takers, and so the thought of putting financial data in the cloud in a place they didn't control was daunting for many of them. And so what I found is that the SaaS adoption looked a lot like, okay, find early adopters who believed in this new mode of, look, I don't have to have IT, I am actually getting new product without ever doing anything. I'm rolling this out to business users very quickly, and ultimately, like the subscription model allows me to not have this big upfront capital outlay, especially if it might not work well for me, and so I kind of can test the waters a little bit, right? We found those people, and we found them in geographic pockets of the US originally, definitely in the Bay Area, a little bit more in the Northeast, not at all in the Southeast. So if I went to the Southeast, it was like, nope, old school CFO who wanted his spreadsheets and wasn't going to talk to us. So that's changed over time. It went from sort of the business user being skeptical to then business users wanted it, and IT was skeptical and kind of a naysayer. Then IT said, no, actually this works, and our role is to make sure that you're a valid vendor. And so now everybody sort of says, oh, well, we come to you because you're a SaaS company. Like that's just a given. We wouldn't even think of on-premise. And that's just been this amazing transformation over 15 years. I see that now in other countries that we go to. You can kind of go to a country and say, okay, well, they're in the business users are accepting, but IT isn't phase, or like IT's just figured out its role, and so we're kind of seeing a tipping point where it's starting to really happen in a given geographic market.
No, it's very interesting, and you actually chose SaaS, and then you chose finance, like the CFO office.
Solving my own problem.
Even today, it's amazing, and the product was so strong that the adoption took off. But if I think about even today, the CFOs are probably the last bastion of like saying, hey, maybe we try to get an on-prem solution. I mean, they're getting kind of pushed back on, but even today we're seeing some of that. But let's kind of, you talked about the business model and talking about like venture capitalists at that time, right? Must have been an interesting conversation, right? How did you, because initially you were probably on like fighting the battle on two sides, one on the customer side and making them understand this. How did like, if we kind of double click on that conversation with the venture capital, and this is where I think us venture capitalists are probably mostly wrong, but sometimes we are right, and then things are taken care of. But when you had those conversations, what was the feedback like, and how did you take in that feedback?
Yeah, so first let me correct something you just said, which was, oh yeah, well there's just this great rapid adoption. Not entirely true. I can tell you so this also speaks a little bit to the kind of way we were operating back then. Literally, we had a fax machine that orders would be faxed into. And so I used to walk by the fax machine like once an hour, like, where's an order? Somebody's got to send something in. We've got all these discussions happening. Where's the freaking order? So no, it didn't always just come like flowing in. I think with venture capital, there were a lot of, I would say we probably, I was fighting more of an uphill battle than I think I ever realized at the time. I was an unproven founder. I'd never started another company before. I had never raised capital in this sort of my own ideal world before. Software as a service was pretty new to many venture folks. I think a lot of people were beginning to look at it and understand it, but not everyone really did. We wanted to sell to the mid-market. That was also just not done, right? Everyone kept saying to me, no, go enterprise. I'm like, no, if I go enterprise, I'm just competing head on with Hyperion, Cognos, and Business Objects, and they have way more resource than we'll ever have. So we've got all these other companies that need that functionality, but are actually not as willing to pay a lot, and they'll be way more receptive to this. And oh, by the way, those other three guys, they don't really want to sell down market. Like their whole business model is built on that big, heavy.
Opening was in that mid.
So that was the opening, but the problem was that hadn't been done that often, at least not in 2003. The other piece was then just like go to market around that meant, look, hey, we're a light, inside sales driven, and very remote oriented company. So we're going to do professional services remotely. We're going to sell remotely. We might not even actually see a customer. Well, that sort of wasn't super well accepted. And then finally, everyone kind of said, yeah, finance, no one's ever going to put it in the cloud. Oh, and if they do, Microsoft will win. Like I can't tell you how often I heard like Excel, everyone has Excel, Microsoft will win. Somehow they're going to do something in Excel. So, okay, so there were a lot of hurdles. What finally clicked was finding, so I started with one venture firm before we ever even had anything but a PowerPoint deck. So let's get that, we should come back to that because that's what would I do differently? Well, that's probably one of the things I would do differently. But then the other thing is finding other investors was really finding a connection with someone that understood the financial space. So I think I was counting our first 4 investors were either former CFOs or had invested in financial software before. Like they got it. They understood the problem we were trying to solve at a different level than me describing it and then sort of oh yeah, okay, that sounds interesting. It was, yeah, okay, I've actually experienced that problem, and so there was a little bit more of a connection there, and that's what helped to get us forward with a few folks.
How did you think, like, as one venture firm after another venture firm said no, 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 no,
yeah,
no.
70 plus of them.
70 plus, right?
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't think I can handle that kind of rejection, right? So how did you kind of think through that? You must be like really tough.
Yeah, I think I was sort of crazy again. It's like, well, this is going to succeed. We have to keep going, and you just kind of keep doing it. I think I would change that, right? It's the sort of, why are you still banging your head against the wall? And I don't think I saw that early enough. We kept trying to change some things about how we presented, what we presented. But I also don't think that I was thoughtful enough about who we were going to talk to. I didn't fully appreciate how on the investor side of things, the understanding your space and being the right person inside of a venture firm, establishing a connection with the entrepreneur, not just having someone show up and pitch you and like, that's it, you're done. I didn't fully appreciate those things.
I think that's a very interesting learning because, the relationship between venture capitalist and the entrepreneur is not very transaction oriented. It's more about that chemistry and that long-term relationship,
right,
and also appreciation of that specific domain. And that's I think the key.
I think appreciation of domain, that personal connection point with someone, understanding that venture capital isn't about the firm per se as much as the connection you make with the right partner inside of the firm. Those are just things I didn't understand very well, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out. I think, partially the other piece of it is like I walk in here and realize like you guys have a huge resource that I didn't. I didn't have a lot of people that I heard stories from and talked to. I just sort of charged out and went and tried to do it. And wasn't, some of these kinds of things, forums didn't exist in quite the same way, or if they did, I was not plugged into them. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm just merrily beating my head against the wall by myself in the dark. Like, oh, we should probably do something different. Let's try that. And so, yeah, it's a lot of failure. How did I keep going? I think there was one point where, probably haven't talked a lot about this, but we actually, it had been 9-10 months of trying to raise money. I had kind of continually gotten bridge loans from the one venture guy that we had. And then we kind of, he said, well, look, I'm going to have trouble going back to the partnership now. Like, we haven't been able to raise this next round. We might have to have a separate track here of trying to sell the business. And that's just a soul-crushing, like, wow, okay. Now we're truly failing. That's not super exciting. And so I said, look, I get it. And we scaled back all kinds of things, scaled back salaries. We went to the team and said, hey, look, we're having some trouble. And there's really two paths we can go down. I can ask some of you to leave altogether and we'll just shrink the team down, or everybody can cut back salaries by some amount and like together we'll save some money to keep this going longer. They all went, talked for a night and came back and said, nope, we're all in, let's go, cut all of our salaries and we'll keep going. And so that was, that was one of the times where I realized, all right, so this is great. I've got a great team that really believes, and to have people say, yep, I'm willing to take a lot of personal sacrifice because we believe in what we're doing was pretty cool. We almost
I think what you're
didn't get
pointing at is basically the importance of building that culture and the trust in that early stages of the team, right?
So I don't think it's just culture is something that I was pretty passionate about. And I'll point out to RMS with Rich and Hemant. I loved working at RMS. It was I loved the people. I loved and RMS is insurance. And so for those of you that think finance isn't super sexy, there's a lot of people that don't think insurance is super sexy. So not the sexiest of places, but I loved it. I loved everything about it. And so part of what I realized after leaving RMS is how great the culture had been and how much that made me motivated to go to work every day for over 10 years in a way that I wanted other people to have. And so in starting Adaptive, because after Adaptive, I'd been at a few places that weren't like that at all. There was not nearly the chemistry among execs. There was a lot of sort of different cultural currents going on. I said, I need to recreate the culture that we had at RMS, where everybody is really working hard, very smart, and super passionate, and really dedicated to the company. And so that kind of came out from the beginning. And I think the other part of culture that was important to me at Adaptive was a really big focus on the customer themselves. And I bought so much software from people that the experience was just bad all around, whether it was the support or the service or the implementation or whatever. I didn't want us to be that company. And I knew that as a subscription-based company, we always had to earn the right to be there. Unlike sort of selling under a license and then kind of maintenance, but you're kind of walking away in a lot of cases. This was every day you had to prove yourself. And so we did a lot to make sure that customers loved Adaptive, even when we didn't have the most complete product set out there. We listened and said, tell us what's next and what's most important to you, and then we go off and deliver some portion of that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, the more I hear this story, you were just kind of in that time, like 7 years ago, you were kind of building all those pillars that we just taken for granted. Inside sales, selling to mid-market and SMB, customer success at scale, and not to talk about SaaS. So that's just some amazing accomplishments through that time.
Hired great people, right? So we hired very smart people that bought into the vision and that were able to either figure it out or brought some of that knowledge to the team.
That's fantastic. At this point, I'd open it up to everyone for questions. I really want to talk about scaling the company and the ultimate exit as well. So we'll kind of talk through all of that. But if there are questions that's starting to come up, then we can maybe start.
So actually, two questions. One is, so why didn't Microsoft build Adaptive Insights? It's sort of a weird thing. I mean, they should, right? Because there's Vienna, there's you guys, there's Anaplan, and
So the question is, why did Microsoft not ultimately build and succeed?
And a second question I'll ask a lot because it's different. So you're at Workday now.
Yes.
Right? So why are you there? I mean, you've got a great team. You got a great team. Great sales guy, Brett Gawant, a great CEO. The company is great. Are you afraid that Adaptive will be engulfed by this giant and all of its good stuff will get diluted? Is that why you're there? Why are you there?
So how is Adaptive kind of merging into Workday?
That was very politically put. That was great. So let me start with why didn't Microsoft do this? Honestly, I've never quite figured it out. What I think happened in this CPM space is that, so there was about $14 billion that got spent buying Cognos, Hyperion, and Business Objects. And that was this massive buying spree, and that happened back in 2006 or 7, something like that. From my perspective, that was the best thing ever, because big companies just got swallowed up by even bigger companies who had even more of a focus up market. Microsoft kind of wasn't playing in the space. What they did was come out, it was all very SharePoint oriented. Yeah. So they tried to build something called Performance Point with Excel as a front end, and they tried to build a product in this space. And I think what they found is that they just weren't, that was the wrong architecture all around. It was still an on-premise product that was very IT-centric, and it became too hard and heavy. They had bought, like, what, 3, 4 different general ledger companies, Great Plains, Navision, Exapta, and Solomon, and we're trying to merge that together to form a core accounting platform. I think that core accounting platform problem was way bigger than they thought it was, way harder than they thought it was, and so I think a lot of resource went to that, and they viewed planning and reporting as a kind of an afterthought. And when SharePoint and Performance Point didn't succeed, rather than doubling down on the space in some other way, they just kind of pulled out. Was great for us.
I think I can add to that, because fortunately or unfortunately, I was in Microsoft in those years when the company kind of seemed to lose direction. And I think the key thing about Microsoft is it just did not have the DNA to deliver like a point enterprise software solution. If you think about Microsoft's strategy, it was mostly the operating system and then the productivity applications, right? Beyond that, they created a great server and tools business, and then they created the Xbox and entertainment business. But actually creating one focused enterprise solution, one could argue it could be like too small for Microsoft to like create and manage an org, but it just doesn't fit in anywhere in the company, even today. And that's the whole issue with that whole Dynamics org. It's just a bunch of point solutions that never seem to kind of work together. But
and why am I still there? Yeah. Because I honestly, I love what we do. And so I spend a lot of time with customers still, a lot of time with partners. And I see an opportunity within Workday to really bring this vision out even bigger than we had an opportunity to do by ourselves. The combination of planning with financials, with HCM really gives you, like, all in one place, the opportunity to do what we've been talking about forever, which was to plan, execute, analyze, and then just rinse and repeat over and over again. And so it's a fantastic opportunity and a really great company. So culture was a huge part of the acquisition. Like, we fundamentally see the world from products the same way. We treat our employees the same way. We view customers the same way. And so that alignment made it like, oh, well, why wouldn't I say? Now, I've pulled back a little, I'll be perfectly honest. I don't spend quite as much of my waking hours as I used to, but that's a good thing after a while. So.
Right. So the question is learnings from the inside sales go-to-market motion at that time.
So it took us a long time to get all the roles exactly right. What's now kind of everyone, it's either a BDR or SDR role. We had those people, then we fired those people, then we brought them back, and then we refined them. Like, that whole lead qualification, it took us a while to get that right. We got really good, and one of the things that I think helped us is that we did get really good at lead generation from a marketing perspective, and especially taking advantage of both webinars and essentially kind of really inbound lead generation. And that helped to fuel the engine after a while. It took us a while to figure that out. We also began to get a little bit better at figuring out, and so we didn't always get this right, when to go and spend the time and money to meet someone on site, and when to just have a conversation over the phone. And so over time, we've clearly started segmenting the team into smaller business and mid-market business and the enterprise. And I mean, the enterprise motion of sales is just very different from what we've had in mid-market and SMB. So each of those pieces we had to fine-tune and learn over time. And then we really began to get sort of the whole customer success side of things, right? Renewals, you're going to laugh at this. So my renewal strategy to start was, look, it's an auto-renewing contract. So, again, thanks to RMS, that was one of the things I learned was, hey, let's try to get this to just automatic, like that's written in. You're going to renew unless you proactively cancel. Easy. I came into it with a belief that you didn't want the contract to come up every month. So it's a 1-year commit. Hey, and I knew that finance people don't like monthly subscription payments, right? I don't want to have to pay an invoice every month. So just send me one, right? This is a product I need for a year anyway. So 1 year upfront, we got that right. We learned then, we started with, okay, 1 year upfront, it's gonna auto renew. We had no customer success. So the people that were going after renewals was like, people in our very small accounting team that would call up and say, hey, your order is due for renewal. Like, it was literally, customer success was our accounting team to start with. And we basically just started sending out invoices. And surprisingly, people just paid them. And not only that, like we said, oh, well, you had negotiated this discount and the list price is here. So we actually started uplifting price by up to 25% over the prior year without really even having a conversation. And that started to just get paid as well. And so for a while, we just, like what we realized is, wow, people really, once they use us, they really love our software. And so those upfront negotiated discounts, we were able to claw back a little bit. Over time, we had to get much more thoughtful, much more structured in that. And that's where a customer success team came in. And so we changed that relationship with the customer as well.
Great. Steve?
Remarkable story about the team coming together with that choice. I mean, kudos to you to give them that choice. Most people would have fired people. So that's something
really a testament to them.
Remarkable. What tactic, I'm going to ask a two-part question. From team building perspective, what tactic do you think worked best? And then what do you think you would have done given your learnings? What would you do? So what would you
Lessons from team building.
Lesson learning for,
Yeah.
more specific,
So it's been kind of hard from my perspective because I didn't ever do a lot of self-reflection. And now I've had some time to do that. I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I see that. Again, back to that, well, I just sort of charged ahead and didn't really think about why things either did or didn't work sometimes. I think that the key to the team early on was that I just brought a lot of passion to what we did. And so that got them excited. I rolled up my sleeves and got in and solved problems every day with them and alongside of them. And I think that really built a lot of sense of like, this isn't just about any one person, like this really is about all of us. And so anytime there was an issue, it was like, hey, who can help? If you don't have time, it's okay, but I'm gonna be here tonight, we'll buy pizza, let's get this thing done. I know that like everybody seems to do that now, that isn't super uncommon, but I think the fact that we built a lot of trust among that team, and they really got a sense that it was a team success and not just an individual success, really built a lot of loyalty among people. And they began to be really passionate about what we did, and they began to really care about the customer. So we had them on the phone with the customer as well, from engineers to finance people. Like our customers they knew who was in finance and they knew who was in engineering, and like that really when you're working and you know who you're helping, it makes everybody really feel passionate about what they're doing.
Fantastic. Yeah. So how does the venture capital investors disrupt your operations?
Also very politically put. So I guess I would say, like, theoretically, it shouldn't change your operations, right? I mean, the investor and board's role is to hire a management team that goes and decides how to make things happen day to day. I think the only thing that I would maybe reflect back on is like, wow, the monthly board meeting and the kind of constant question is both good and distracting, right? I'm not sure I would have traded it. I really liked the discipline of meeting monthly with the whole board early on. I can't say that I always liked their input or their opinions, but it was helpful. And that's one of the things I think I've learned over time is that sometimes what you hear isn't pleasant, but it's better for you if you're able to step aside from whatever bias you have and really evaluate why that advice is being given to you, and try to say, okay, put my own personal bias aside. If I did that, what would that advice feel like? And so I got better at that. I was not always very good at that. So I don't think they're disruptive day-to-day to operations. I think mostly they're helpful, and you just have to find a way. I think what I will say, I also have a newfound respect for managing your board. And by that I mean, look, your investors and your board members, what you want is to actually create this really strong relationship with them outside of the boardroom. And it took me a while to really get that the conversation outside of the boardroom is the most important conversation that you can have. So pre-board meetings, make sure that no one is surprised by anything, right? Have the conversation ahead of time. Tell them what's going on so that when you get to the board meeting, you aren't faced with shock, awe, and anger if something isn't going right. Like, that conversation should already have taken place, and what you should be talking about is like valuable input that they can provide now to help you solve a problem. Because they can help you solve a problem, but they're going to be better at it if they've come into it already getting past whatever shock or anger or whatever their emotion is, and then they can come together in a way that's more productive for you. So manage them by having that relationship and having those pre-conversations. Then the board meeting, well, I mean, there's nothing like success. So get your company to do well, board meetings go surprisingly easily. When you have challenges, board meetings are always going to be hard. I mean, that's just life.
Thorsten?
What was the closest that Adaptive came to dying and why?
Before the second round. Literally had bankers that were out shopping. Actually, we never got to shopping. We were just about to sign an agreement with some bankers to go and think about selling the company when we got an investor to step forward. And we said, stop, bankers, don't do that. And like, yay, let's do this deal.
So there was never a breaking point later on in terms of scaling?
No, thankfully, we kind of did pretty well. Well, and is all relative. Well, relative to that, to like literally shutting down. So that was in, no salary for me and the co-founder. All of the employees are on sort of partial salary. We're not spending any money, and we're just dying to get there. So that was the closest. We had to scale back a bit in 2008 and 2009 as the economy slowed down. But what was great for us is that the business that we're in, we said, hey, what better time than now to have control over what your financial future looks like? You have to buy planning software. Like, there's nothing better for this time than this. So we actually grew slightly, but back to your question, we fired all of our SDRs because we're like, well, that's a cost we don't need. We can easily do without that, and then sort of pay for that down the road a little bit, but it seemed smart at the time.
Right. Key inputs from VCs.
Yeah, key input. So we had a lot of input on pricing because venture guys would call our customers, and the customers would say, wow, we love this product, and they don't charge enough for it. And that was both right, but sort of really frustrating, because when we talked to the customers about it, they would say, well, of course you can't raise my price. Like, this is the best deal ever, and I want this, but no, I'm not willing to pay you more.
Someone else should pay you more.
Yeah, exactly. So that was always a great advice, and we have reevaluated price over time. I think that, let's see, bad advice. There was a lot of, I won't say it necessarily came from the board, but from an exec we brought in to like go down the open source path. That was probably the one thing one of the biggest things I regret, right? So here you are, you're a SaaS company. I've sort of built this whole thing with the thought that we are not going to be on premise. It's a fundamentally different model. And then all of a sudden, we had this whole open source thing to try to get buzz and get people to create things. Well, if I had really thought about this deeply, we're selling to finance people. We're not selling to IT. Finance people have zero interest in touching code and getting deep. So it was just wrong from the start. And really all it did was it put a whole bunch of free software out in the hands of people in a bunch of different countries that had no interest whatsoever in ever moving forward with us. So that was the board was like, yeah, this is a great idea. We're going to go down that path. And that was not a good idea. It was a horrible idea, to be honest.
So don't listen to everything that VCs say.
Yes.
We have a few minutes left. I want to touch on one aspect, and then we'll probably take like a couple of questions. So the exit, right? The $1.5 billion question that everybody has there in their mind. How did that, I understand there was a IPO process in play, and then suddenly things changed. What was, to the extent that you can share, what was the process and timeline, and then how did the team think about the two options?
Yeah, so we rewind the clock. We had gone through a process to go public. We were well in that process, and we had specifically said we are not dual tracking this. Our bankers, we looked in the eyes and said, guys, we're not shopping the company here. We're going public. That's what we're doing. So that's not really what's happening. And so, charging forward.
Did the bankers actually come up with that kind of a suggestion that you should actually do some kind of dual tracking, especially after I think AppDynamics had done that a few months earlier at the time, right?
So there was definitely some conversations about should we do that, various board opinions about whether that was the right thing or not. But we said, no, we're going public. So we did not shop the company. This was an inbound conversation, and partially because Anil Bushri, new Adaptive, interestingly had invested in two of our competitors,
Tidemark, right?
Tidemark and Anaplan. And he reached out to us when I think it was probably the day that we did the public filing and said, hey, we should probably talk. Anil and Tom Bogan, our CEO, had worked together at Greylock before, so had a relationship. And so Anil reached out to Tom and said, let's talk. That conversation kind of muddled along for a bit. They did some diligence. We basically said, well, look, we're a public company. You can read all you want to read in the prospectus. Tell us what else you might need to know. So there was a little bit of technical due diligence, but we were very cautious about this because as far as we could tell, this was more competitor than it was acquirer. And so there was an interesting dance between, are they really interested or are they just poking around for information? We were pretty guarded about what we would say. We also weren't certain that this was a big deal for Workday. We knew that, and that this wasn't something they had done in the past in terms of acquiring something at this size and scale. And so that also left a little skepticism.
Especially, I think they had a partnership with Anaplan at some point, right? Like
investment in Anaplan.
Investment and partnership,
Investment in Tidemark.
Right? Yeah.
We were partners
So
with Workday.
a really interesting dynamic.
Interestingly, I think we figured out we had more Workday customers than anyone else out there. So that was, I think, a little bit of a surprise to them how far along we had gotten with their customer base. Bottom line was that, look, we kind of had a couple of back and forths, didn't at all stop the IPO process. So Tom, our CEO, was out on the roadshow, and we had a few more conversations. And at some point in the roadshow, he said, I can't keep stepping out of roadshow meetings. You need to take some of these calls and help push this forward. And we're either going to get there or we're not, but we're going to keep going with the roadshow. So the roadshow was going really well. That was a great thing for us because really what it did for us was allow us to just say, look, like, take it or leave it. This is how we view this deal. And it's okay if you don't think that this is the right structure or terms for the deal because we're going to go public. It's imminent here, and that's going well. We literally signed the deal on a Sunday night at 4 a.m. We were supposed to price Wednesday morning in New York.
So the timing.
That was a little dicey.
So the timing, like it went down to the wire, and was that like a kind of you think a negotiation strategy on, or was it more like the diligence getting done by
I'll characterize it this way. If it was Oracle on the other end, I would have expected that kind of we're going to bleed you to the end and then crush you with price. That actually wasn't the deal here. Really, the deal was they were trying to figure out like where we were both happy, and it just the whole time window was too compressed.
Gotcha.
So I never felt like they were squeezing us to get something out. It was more just us saying, no, here's what we want, and them trying to essentially get to that point on their side by asking more questions, doing a little more diligence, and continuing on.
Cool, awesome. Well, I think we are kind of running up on time, so maybe one question, and then I want to leave time for you guys to kind of mix and mingle as well. So one last question, maybe from.
As investors and VCs, we are probably all guilty of overfitting to failures, and something I see in you is the exact opposite of that. So to the 70 or so VCs who said no to you, what do you think they missed?
Look, I see their side of it, right? Again, I was an unproven guy in a market that seemed to have a lot of risk. So I get it. Like it was risky. It was a risky bet. I think what they missed is they missed my passion and my drive, and they kind of missed the fact that customers really like us and wanted this product. And that only began to really kind of play out later because just for so many years, we just really kept pushing forward even in the face of all kinds of adversity. But I can't blame them, right? I really can't. It's a hard thing when you see this sort of early stage thing and like, yeah, okay, customers are kind of coming, but at really low ASP, and it's not as many as we want, and how are you going to make this work? And there were just a lot of questions. I think that customer passion was a big thing they missed.
So bottom line is grit, determination, and customer passion. It's basically a recipe for success.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.